maybe lack of preparation. Now, of course, you don't know. I'm sure they reviewed extensively the other side of the tournament as it was being played, but just really surprised that when they were down, that they weren't able to change, and then, as you guys had mentioned, the frustration piece kicks in, and if you are coaching teenage males at that level, as soon as that testosterone and frustration kicks in, it's hard to roll it back. So I'm sure they were dealing with that on the bench and in the dressing room as well.
I just wanted to mention I'm recording the presentation. I don't know if Morris is still on, but Morris, I've had two people email me because I've taken off the. I edited your portion of the presentation, and I'm recording it, and I will edit parts of it. And I think what happened when Morris talked, he made reference to alpha male and alpha female coaches, and he brought up some names of coaches, and I called him wondering about leaving that stuff on, and he said it was okay initially, but then we looked at it again, he asked me to remove it. So I just want you to know that if you're sensitive at all when I've recorded it about anything you've said, if you've mentioned a name, and it's great to be upfront and straightforward and honest, but sometimes it can be taken offensively beyond here. So I don't want to post anything. Everything I will save privately, and it can't be shared unless I edit something narrow and send it to you, not on a site, but just as a smaller part of a video. So just that heads up, Morrison. Thanks for calling me back. But I've had two requests from actually coaches in the States that wanted to get that presentation. It was shut down. And one of them asked me to give them your contact information, Morris. So I'll do that, and you can follow up with them if you wish. Okay? Go ahead. I'm really, I'm intrigued about the whole approaching the World Juniors short-term competition. Whether you look at one game, I want to talk about one game, one strategy and tactic. And I don't know if Mike Kennedy's on. He sent a video out. He's been breaking down incredible video and incredible details that I really, and I think Tim knows this, I don't see video as well as Tim or Mike. They pick out details to the point where I appreciate that. And if I'm going to go for anybody for a breakdown of situations and the nuances of what's occurring, I'll go to them. But when I watch this, any tournament I leave, and this comes from National Olympic experience, what we fail to do is debrief short-term competition like this. Like, will the staff actually take time to have these kinds of discussions? What will we learn from this entire experience? And not just us as coaches, the players. What are their thoughts? What's their level of thinking in this whole thing? So I think we've got a long ways to go to tap into the potential of the human mind in our players, in our coaches. And if we're going to make the game better and serve the good of the game, I think everything's really important. The little nuances and the details. And I didn't mean to disrespect, Morris, your discussion of wanting to get into that, but I think that knowing some of the people that are on, I'm coming at watching that Worlds from a more general overall point of view. And where's the game going? How are we going to compete? What does the U.S. do that we can't? Finland does that we can't. And we exchanged an awful lot of text yesterday about that. So those are the kind of discussions where I was coming from, Morris. My mindset, yeah, I got little ideas about these details, and we can go back to that now if you wish. But I think my point what the girls have made here and how they're utilizing the information is really valuable. So I'm concerned about, are we going to get better moving forward, or are we going to spin our tires and hope for the next best outcome, and then we can keep our cool and pull a rabbit out of the hat in the end, which happens a lot in these kind of tournaments.
You went, Wally, I've got to get going. I've put a couple of notes in the chat section if anybody wanted to know what my thoughts were. And because Live Barn is calling me, that's my work. And you know what, Wally, we definitely can get better. And yet one of the keys, though, is to actually break from tradition. Tradition stifles performance quite often. Okay, God bless everybody. See you.
Okay.
Yeah, Wally, one of the thoughts I had, I forget who mentioned it earlier, is we talked about, you know, Canada's D and their ability to jump in. And I thought to myself, and again, you know, I don't love the commentators necessarily, but one of them's like, oh, now Canada's D are jumping in. Like, why are they not doing that right from the beginning? That might be the best offensive weapon we have. And once they started doing it, America can handle it. And I just thought to myself, like, why wouldn't the coach be like, let's go down this road right away? Like, Byram, take the puck. Schneider, take the puck. Like, go, guys. Because once they started doing it, it worked. But I couldn't understand why that was like a tactical change. That should have been a bedrock strategy. You know, I get, we're worried about the US's speed or their ability to execute, blah, blah, blah. Again, that goes back to mindset. You're worried about what the other team's doing instead of showing your best hand and playing your aces. You got to play your aces. Like, why would you keep those guys in the cage and like, oh, we'll use it later? Like, to me, that makes no sense at all. Especially since, you know, their top line offensively wasn't generating anything. So again, those are things to me, like, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the pregame or the coaches talks the night before. But strategically, that seemed like the no-brainer that those guys would be jumping up with the puck all the time. And every time they did it, it worked. So they should have been doing it from, the first drop.
Kim, just for your information, my nephew, who referees now, and he played college hockey, he and I exchanged unbelievable texts through the entire game. And we were talking along the lines of the big picture of the tournament and the outcome and what we could have done that we didn't do. Everything that's been brought up, the sports psych side of the fact we didn't have any adversity getting ready for it, how important adversity is in short-term competition. Short-term competition is a whole different ball of wax. And this is a textbook opportunity to learn. And that's sort of what when it's all said and done, I'm just trying to learn the most I can out of it. And I'm not one of the guys that gets into the details. I just felt, okay, they say we had 19 first-round picks and had the most talent. The outcome should have been different. It wasn't. And I think being able to get more out of all our players with interchanging positions, spontaneously and intuitively, playing like the Finns played more, in my mind, was the biggest thing that's missing. And it's not a short-term thing. It's just a philosophy of how you want your team to play moving forward. Do you line up with 2D and 3 forwards and we play like that the whole game? Or are you lining up with 5 players and they're going to be wherever they are when the situation dictates it relative to their talents? And Canada definitely did not achieve their ability. And I'm not saying this because I don't know that they were the most talented. They certainly didn't look like the most talented. A couple of the best players stuck out, or the most identified best players. So, but that's where I'm coming from here. And I'm sorry for dominating the whole thing, but
so I will interject at this point. And I will definitely strongly agree, as always, that our game is not as progressive as the U.S. game is. They've been working on this for years, 5-player offense and taking offense to another level. I definitely will agree with that. There's a lot of things for me when I look at this game. Sorry, Morris had to get off because like he and I talked yesterday, and when we were talking, we were both like, yeah, like what actually happened in the first period in particular. So I went back and watched the first period again, and until the second goal, and my thoughts would be this: overall in the game, the U.S. was a little bit better offensively and a little bit better defensively, and their goaltending obviously was very solid. That's a pretty good combination. Um, and I think the teams are really closely matched. I think, sort of counter to Kim's point, in some ways, Canada was so good going in. Why would you change your game just to play an opponent that you should be able to beat playing your game? The U.S., I think, did adapt a little bit in that they didn't play nearly as much 5-player offense as they had earlier in the tournament. They played a simpler game. They kept their D out of the offense more than they did in other games. And so on balance, I think U.S. deserved to win is one of the things I'm saying. Now, having said that, I think it's really important to keep some perspective that after the U.S. made it 2-0, it's before I say that, I'll agree with one other point totally, in that we looked tentative and we didn't play as well as we played before. Our as I said to Wally in a text, the 2 periods against Finland and 2 periods against Russia might be the smartest hockey I've ever seen any team play. Hardly a bad puck decision ever. Like, I've never seen team play that well before. And maybe the 2010 Sochi team, the men. But anyway, so the U.S. makes it 2-0 on what is really a lucky break and a great skill play. You know, if that net cam is not in the net, and you can go back and watch it, it hit the net cam, the puck goes behind the net, and maybe they never score that goal. So they got a lucky break there. They executed well on their first goal, but lots of tips don't go in. They had a little bit of puck luck. We hit 2 goalposts. We missed a breakaway. You convert 1 or 2 of those, and we're maybe not even having this discussion. So there was puck luck, it's just hockey. That's just what happens. And I agree with Kim's point about Cousins, but I would globalize it. Their best line was better than our best line. And that's never a good starting point if you're trying to win a big game. They just outperformed our best line. And again, I think just generally we looked, again, agree with the general point. We looked afraid to win or scared to lose, whichever way you want to put it. And the U.S. were just more focused, more determined from the get-go. But Canada dominated territorially the last 2 periods. They outshot the U.S. something like 23-6 in the last 2 periods, 15-1 in the third period. But even having said that, they didn't really generate the quality chances that you would want to see with that kind of territorial dominance. And that's partly why I say I think the U.S. was just a little bit better defensively. So I'll make my last point. So specifically in the first period, I watched it really carefully. Really good first 9 minutes. We controlled the whole first 9 minutes of the game. The U.S. did not have much puck possession. It changed at the 11-minute mark, where in a space of 5 minutes, we made what you could say are 10 really bad puck decisions. Couple of offensive zone giveaways, twice at the offensive blue line, didn't get it deep. 2 or 3 times couldn't get it out of our zone. Couple of times we turned it over in the neutral zone. And that led to 30 seconds zone time by the US, 25 seconds zone time by the US, 30 seconds zone time by the US. Those 5 minutes, they literally had about 3 minutes of offensive zone time because of our puck management. And that's how the game changed. And that's hockey. I mean, we made some poor decisions. They took advantage of it, and they deserve to win. And that does not mean that we're a bad team. But again, I agree that we need to sort of change and get more on the NHL page in terms of playing a 5-player offensive game. And this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll shut up. And one of those bad plays in my mind was we were changing at one point. I've got it written down, but we had full possession going into the offensive zone, and this drives me crazy in the women's game, especially with our national team. But we're basically 1-on-4, and we're driving wide, and we throw the puck at the net. Basically give it to the US instead of driving it deep, protecting the puck, wait for the change to happen, and possess it. We did not have enough of a puck possession mentality, and it's stuff like that kills your game. Like, that player had zero chance of scoring from the boards, circle tops, and he just throws it at the net instead of possessing the puck. And there was stuff like that started the domino effect to the first goal, and then the scramble was on, even though we dominated the last 2 periods. So that's kind of my more than 2 cents, I guess, my dollar's worth of analysis.
Tim, excellent points. I wrote down a lot of notes as you talked, as usual. You brought up amazing ideas. My question, Tim, we dominated to begin with, but once the Americans got the first goal, the way we play changed. And I texted my nephew, I might have called a timeout after a first goal. That entered my mind as wearing a coach's hat, because the shift in the way we played after that first goal, it's psychological warfare here. And we were on our heels. So would you call a timeout at that point? I don't know that anybody would. That's all we need to do. We're sitting on our couch. It's easy to think about these things, but we changed the way we played for a while after that. And then the adversity for them to come out and get that first goal, they jumped right on us. Yes, a lucky bounce and this kind of thing, but they came out with energy and they capitalized on it. And for us to respond as well as we did and play that well in the last 2 periods, anybody could have won that game. That's my point, is a short-term competition. And I go back to 2002 with the men. We wouldn't have got to the final if, I don't know if it was Belarus that had a fluky goal against Sweden, which knocked them out. You never know what's going to happen, but there's little coaching moments during that whole game that could you have done anything different? Would you have done anything different? And I think, generally speaking, if you're developing coaches, is you want to make sure you are aware of everything happening around you in those circumstances, and seeing the big picture of the game, going into it, your talent, how you're going to use it. I think these are things that we have to do better in the future, and we may not be there yet, but there's some countries that can be there because they're so specialized in their work with their elite players. They bring the U.S. together longer. In Finland, it starts at 13 and 14. Those best players have been playing a figure-it-out style of hockey with a great degree of skill. And mentally, the Finns came from behind and beat the Russians. And they could have beaten the USA when you look at the penalties they took that gave up the goals. So that made that entire tournament an amazing opportunity. I have no hard feeling or bad feeling about losing. I just think what needs to be learned from it, what can be learned, and the coaching elements here were the things that entered my mind. And I'm really glad that the girls, like I never thought, Kim, that girls would watch that game, but you as coaches and Laura as coaches, you're formally making it a task, and they appear to have enjoyed it or being engaged. If you've done that, the female game's going to take steps, leaps and bounds in the future. So congratulations for that.
So Wally, would you have called a timeout after that goal?
I don't think I would have on the bench. I don't think I would have had the wherewithal to do that. I'm just saying, sitting in my chair, being able to evaluate and criticize and question, exchanging texts, and I don't know, but
no, I think it's an interesting point because when you said it, I thought about it, and I thought if I'm coaching Canada, who's the favorite, and I call a timeout there, that's a show of weakness, and that I shouldn't have because I'm the favorite. So I think the U.S. goes crazy, right? But if it was the U.S. calling it, maybe that's not a good example, but let's say it was Finland against Canada or Russia against Canada, and they got scored on early and they called a timeout. I think it has a totally different flavor on your bench, right? If you're the underdog and you're calling the timeout there, the other end, your opponent's like, yeah, whatever, they're screwed. We're better than them. But that's kind of the expected that you might call a timeout there. So I would never do it if I was the favorite that early on, because now you're just opening up the floodgates, right? I can't remember which game it was. Can't remember if it was Russia or Finland. They called a timeout kind of at a weird point, maybe 6 minutes left in the game or 6 minutes left in the second period. And they came out like gangbusters. And I thought to myself, I think I was watching that game with my team, so maybe it was Russia. And my girls were like, why are they calling the timeout? And I was like, wait and see. Because it was the underdog calling the timeout at kind of a weird point. And my players wouldn't be used to play like coaches necessarily calling a timeout in the second period. That's not normal, right? But they got, and again, I can't remember which team it was that did it, but they got a phenomenal response from their team out of calling it. And I think that would have been, suicide by Canada to call a timeout there. I think the U.S. would have probably scored the next shift.
The timeout I was thinking of was that Russia took when they were down 4-0.
Yes, that's it.
6 or 7 minutes left in the game. But I think what he was doing was telling them, look, I'm going to pull a goalie here. Where if we get possession in the offensive zone, he was warning his team that he was going to do that, because then they did. Like about 40 seconds later, they got the goalie out, obviously really early. So I think that's what that was about.
And they got a couple of good chances, like almost immediately right out of that timeout. But I just mean it to say, like, if you're going to call an unconventional timeout, right? Not the 2 minutes left in the game and we're down by 1 or that sort of thing, right? I think you have to be cognizant of whether you're the underdog or the dominant team, because it will definitely, with girls for sure, it would have a massive psychological effect of what they perceived of why you're calling the timeout, because they always want to know, why are we calling this timeout now? Why are you doing this, coach? They might not ask me, but it's for sure the first thought in their head. I don't know, again, on the boys' side, if that would be similar or they would care as much. But the perception of your own team and what that means, and the perception of your opponent, I think could be really important there.
The point is, you're talking about it, and this is debriefing. And this is what I mean about anybody who coaches in that tournament. Those things happen. They could come up. And I know Tim being involved with the Olympics and the amount of preparation of what could happen and the need for timeouts and when you're going to do them and if you're going to do them and the scenarios. Well, this is a new scenario. Every game is a new scenario. And I think just being prepared means having a talk about that kind of thing, having learned from this experience is important. What the Finns did, what the Russians did, it's all important. So I'm looking at all the lessons learned, watching the coaches on the bench react versus look in control of the situation instead of looking like they're playing the game from the bench. That's very difficult to do. And as I say, watching the NHL playoffs, I never saw reactive coaching at all. I saw total calm. I didn't see frustration or anxiety. I just saw an even keel approach. So coaches have to be better at that and be more aware of that. And I thank you, Kim. I having talked to you, I would be less inclined to call a timeout of that situation. But the play shifted so much, and I would have to know the group of boys. And if we had addressed it before, you never know. Be prepared for this because it might happen. My reason to calling it is reminding us we've controlled this game. And this is something to forget about, but to fuel our fire and get us back on our toes. And that's what I typed to my nephew. We're on our heels. We have to get back on our toes. And where I heard this comes from observing and mentoring a coach at the University of Ottawa. And Tim, that was the coach that I sent the power play video on.
Yep.
And he was playing a team that was unbelievable in first, place. They had lost quite handily to them early in the season. And Tim broke down. They looked at the power play of the other team, and he told me to tell him to find a different team to play. Well, he beat that team in the game he coached, and he called a timeout in the third period when he was up 5-3. And I asked him about his timeout. What did you do? He said, well, I told him a joke in French because we were on our heels, and all I wanted them to do is get back on their toes. And I actually thought of that last night, the heels toes, from that interaction with him years ago. So this is what I'm saying in coaching and playing. Every one of you is going through experiences and things are locked into your subconscious and they come to bear, and that's where your coaching from the gut comes in when you're on the bench and been through it and done that. And these coaches, they're getting experience. Boy, what an experience to be able to coach in a tournament like that. And I think the big thing is, what are we going to get out of it? What are we going to learn from it moving forward? But boy, I've never seen such a great opportunity to learn from losing. And I hope we can take advantage of it at least and help others to appreciate it.
I don't know what I think. One of my points is there's not a hell of a lot to learn from that game. Not, I think we were nervous. I agree with Kim. Like, I think a timeout after that first goal would have been a definite show of panic, even if it's used to send a message of let's get back to our game and everything else. They were only 5 or 6 minutes out of the and then into the intermission. You can deliver that message, but I would not have called a timeout there. I think that'd be. I always talk about micromanaging the players. You've got to let the players play a little bit. And there's so much character, so much skill on that team. As a coach, I would think they can respond to this and they can get through this. So I wouldn't have called a timeout there myself.
Well, I'm not saying you should have. It entered my mind. That's all I'm saying. I'm not arguing about the timeout, but I adamantly, there's so much to learn from that whole tournament, not just that game. The whole tournament.
There's lots to learn. I'm just saying, it was a close game by two real good teams, and there was a little puck luck one way or the other. One team was obviously more nervous than the other. I'm saying it was my fault because I was hoping and praying, and I asked the gods to not get the U.S. in a semifinal game because I thought they were from the get-go they're the most capable team, but I think that psychologically might have been better for us to play them in a semifinal than to play them in the final. For that reason, I think maybe we were a little more nervous, but we might have been a bit more focused getting to the final if we'd have played them in the semis. So hindsight's 2020, but I was kind of happy when we got the Russians in the semifinal. poor me, bad on me.
How much did being in that pool with no challenge and adversity, how much did that affect? And then winning against the Russians as well as we won. And this is another side of what I'm saying, learning from. You've got to, it's the toilet seat syndrome. You're so high from the big way you played, and all of a sudden the press clippings, and they are the top 19 draft picks. Now you go into a final, and
So you're saying we should have lost one of our games? Like I always hate this argument where
I'm not arguing. I'm just
we're
saying.
playing too well. We're peaking too early. Our job is to play well as long as we can and for as well as we can. Like we were playing great. Why would we change our game going into a final? Why would we even talk about that? We should just play our game. The fact is we didn't play our game very well. And whether it's nerves, whether it's the US was a step better that game, whatever it was, but I don't buy the argument that Finland was a hell of a good team. Hell of a good team. They proved that. They won the bronze medal. They should have beaten the US. And we dominated them for 2 periods. They were not in the game. Not so I don't buy this thing. I agree with we didn't have to face a lot of adversity, but I was so pissed off when Trevor Zegras before the game said, well, they haven't experienced any adversity. Basically, you haven't played anybody yet. Well, Trevor, we freaking waxed the Russians 5-0, who you lost to. And we freaking dominated the Finns, who you should have lost to. So good on him for backing up his comments, but like off base for me. And I'm energized around that point. Like if we're trying to say we should have played poorer earlier on so we can experience some adversity, you take what comes, you do the best you can, you prepare the best you can. And I thought they were exemplary until that final game. And it's really too bad. Sorry for being so emotional about it.
Rick, you posted a comment. I didn't quite get it.
Essentially, Wally, I'm not a fan of win streaks because they are all going to end at some point, and then if it's the last game, not where you want it to happen. So ideally, better to lose along the way. Put that into reality that can happen, and have your even in a short-term competition. And I've had the experience where we've lost early in a round robin situation and come back to be the champions of tournaments. And I've always found it beneficial to get it over with because it's going to happen sooner or later.
So do you coach to lose? Is that what you're saying?
Not at all. I just accept that it's an eventual outcome at some point and we move on from there. And I talk to my team in those terms as well.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Rick. It's kind of a hindsight argument, though. Like you never coach in the moment to lose. And yes, I agree. If you're having a great run, everybody knows eventually it's gonna run out. It's gonna stop. We've had a few World Juniors where it didn't, but I just kind of think it's a hindsight argument. It's true, like on one level, but that doesn't mean that you would have coached differently before that, or that you would have coached differently going into the gold medal game. Like, what would you want them to do differently? Like, I don't know. Like,
I didn't say I would want them to do anything. All I was making, Tim, was an observation that it's going to happen. So if it's going to happen, it's better that it happens in an earlier round or an earlier part of the situation where you can still deal with it rather than have it come up and bite you in the ass at the last end when there is no comeback. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying I coach to lose. Or anything along that line, to be honest with you. I'm just saying that if it's going to happen, let it happen early so you can recover.
Yeah.
The longer they go, the more closer you're getting to that eventuality. And in a situation like Canada was in, where maybe the competition along the way wasn't what it needed to be, they needed to be pushed to the mat. They needed to understand that they weren't. And I agree with the earlier comment that the 5-0 win over the Russians was probably very misleading from a psychological point of view. We are that good. We don't need to do any more. No, you need to get better from here. Maybe that message got lost along the way. I don't know. I'm just doing it all from hindsight, which is real simple. But
I'm guessing that they covered that base. Like I don't see inside our locker room after that Russian game that everybody's. I mean, we're human beings. We feel really good, but I mean, I have pretty complete confidence in that coaching staff from that perspective, that psychological perspective that they knew the U.S. was going to be a tough opponent and maybe the toughest, and in some ways they may have over prepared that way. Who knows? That maybe they scared the guys a little too much. I mean, they've lost a lot of U18 and U17 championships to the U.S., including obviously the last three World Junior gold medals against the U.S. It's almost looking like the female side now, where the psychological advantage has flipped to in my day and Kim's day. We had the big psychological advantage on the women's side. Like, we're the dominant ones. The U.S. knew that we were actually deeper and better, but now it's kind of flipped, and maybe it's flipped to some degree, Canada, U.S. on the men's side too, at the junior level anyway, where there's no fear and in fact extra confidence on the U.S. side. Could be.
Tim, I got a point here. How many people watched the teams enter the video of the players entering the arena? Team Canada? They came in up the stairs and they were waving at people with smiles. And the USA came in with masks on, and you could see the expressions on their eyes and faces. I thought of immediately of their mindset. And that entered my mind as, are you prepared for what's your mindset going into that game? Still high and carrying the positivity of the game before? I don't know. I'm just saying all of these things are part and parcel that could play a role in how they're going to perform in the game. The U.S. came in with game faces on, and we came in, we were celebrating, smiling, and I always love smiling. I'd rather be smiling, but when you've had a game like that before, I think you want to have a game face and be ready for the reality of anything that can happen and be prepared for any eventuality of any game. And you won't control the outcome. It's impossible. But just be prepared for whatever scenario comes about. But that entered my mind. And I think all of the discussions are valid. My big thing here, and Tom Malloy, are you on?
He might have gone to Wildwood to play some shinny illegally.
Yeah.
Oh no, he's still there.
I'm here.
Well, Tom throughout, and I both, I'm still intrigued with the amount of success the Finns have had in the past 10 years and the consistency of their play in dealing with different adversity and being able to play well in being down situations. I just see a mental strength in the side of their game. So I think they're doing some things. And I know in the texting yesterday, they got talking, Alan Andrews talked about his son Josh going to Varamaki and the courses that many North American and Canadian coaches have gone over and taken there. And it's a club system. It's not a community system. It's a real professionally operated, progressive, continuous system with a philosophy of development and a scientific understanding on the psychology and the biomechanics. And the thing that intrigues me is the way the Finns play and how they think and play at such a high speed. That's what impresses me the more. And I think we can be so much better. And that's all we're trying to do.
Say something here?
Yeah.
I've had a lot of experience with the Finns, and they got together and the clubs worked together because they weren't doing very well. So the clubs got together and they'll allow players to go to another club that plays at a higher level and this sort of thing. And plus they all have the same philosophy of how to play. And when they lost that one game, I saw them that I was thinking they're not playing the way they play, because they always try to get between the dots with the puck and all this kind of stuff. And the one game they got clobbered, they weren't doing that whatsoever. And they have a way they play inconsistent, but their skills are, they don't miss. I mean, they take passes, backhand passes, stick on their sticks. Every guy is really sound in their fundamental skills, and they keep on, they have a way they play and they keep on doing it, and it ends up being successful. Like last year at the World Championships men's, they only had 2 NHL players on their team, and they are fringe players, never scored a goal for them, and they won the World Championships. And they've really analyzed the game, and they play the game really, really well. So that's what I know about the Finns.
I would observe that they didn't get the puck into the middle or the big ice against Canada because they never had the puck the first 2 periods. They literally never had the puck.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were, but they're like a bad itch. Eh? They don't go away.
Oh yeah, like I have full
Keep
respect.
coming.
Yeah,
because they did it against Sweden too.
they're
And
really
they should have beat the USA. Trade goalies and they win that game against the USA.
totally agree. They should have beat the U.S.
Just to go, I have a question for the group. I've been sort of backing the lens off a little bit here and thinking about the origin of these players and the systems that they play in. So predominantly major junior representation on Team Canada with some NCAA. USA team for years now has the national development program and team. And as we mentioned, the Europeans play in a club system. I'm wondering if what the group's impression is in terms of, is there a need to have a national development team in Canada at that level or younger? And a group that's together for longer term, or the merits of bringing together elite performers from leagues that are in teams that play throughout Canada, like our current structure.
Well, we can't. We can't do that. We have a business of hockey in major junior, and it's a mini NHL developing for the NHL. So the structure, our system of development, and Peter Elander came on. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Wally. How are you doing?
Good.
I would suggest that Wally, like the national development team in the U.S., is playing in the USHL, and that's similar in terms of ownership and profit margins. And
No, the difference is the Western hockey, the OHL, it's a business. And the partnership of creating an all-star team to play in that league and take them off all of the teams to play in that league, they would have to play against college teams to get competition. I just think we've been there. Like with the national team, it was disbanded to create players for the NHL. We were an enemy for the NHL when the 6-team league was on. And I was there when the national program folded, which would have provided, we couldn't keep players from going to the NHL. We were keeping players who had been played in the NHL and been stars in the NHL. So you're competing with that system. And I agree with you, that's ideal. And in Europe, Finland, Sweden, it's possible. You have a club system. And the club system, I believe, and I'm not sure in Sweden, but in Finland, the club system appears to be under the umbrella of the federation. So I think the leadership, scientifically, biomechanically, psychologically, technically, tactically, there's a continuity, progressive continuity that can be delivered. We can talk about doing it, but it won't happen. Our political business model of the way we operate in North America is just what it is. The Americans were able to pull it off and do it that way, and they've had success with it. And kudos to them for it. But I don't know who decides those things, and I'm sure they've discussed those things and thought of them. But Hockey Canada is, let's face it. There's a lot of players that may be in the NCAA that could have been on the Canadian team. Like when Makar played, the first thing that I thought watching the first game was, he's the best defenseman on the ice. Why isn't he on the power play? And they never used him on the power play. And it's that model of, it's not a criticism. What are you familiar with? The Canadian goalie, that's a pretty good opportunity for him to come from where he came from, to be selected and play, because he came into basically a major junior star player selection process.
But he may choose to play in the junior A, so he could go to college.
Yeah.
That's the reason. Like, it's not that he wasn't good enough for major junior, but as soon as you step your foot on the ice, you can't go to college, and the college route is probably just as successful at developing NHL players that the major juniors.
And like, was it Tom that said, Tom, did you say your assistant coach Makar in minor midget, and he wasn't like what you would call an elite minor midget at that time, just a good one, right? I think.
Yeah, he just said he never thought he'd do it. He had real interest in yesterday's game because he also coached the American defenseman that his dad played in the NHL, lives in Calgary now. Sanderson and Holloway. He coached them in Bantam AAA, so he's had a lot of players go on. So people are now wondering why he's assistant coach and I'm head coach.
But the USA system is that their U17, this year they're born 2004, their centralized team play the USHL teams. And their U18 team play college teams, the year older.
Yeah.
And they're just there for 2 years, and then they go on to play college. Some go to the Canadian, but that's the system. So they've been centralized for 2 full years with other really, really good players. And the ones who get a chance to go there, they go, because it's a ticket to a professional career.
So here's a development question. At the U17 level, I think maybe U18 level, Canada puts 3 teams in the World Championship, and they have their success rate over the last 15 years doing that is really abysmal if you're looking at all other Canadian teams. They've hardly won a gold medal. They won a few, but not many, and they've hardly. I mean, they're out of the mix as often as they're in the mix. So are we, in terms of spreading the love around and developing a big group of players, are we sacrificing that winning championship mentality a little bit, instead of just putting our best players on one team and sending one team, period, bang, and go and try to win? Now, I don't know how they structure the teams, whether they actually do try, like Ontario with the U18 women, where they put all their quote unquote best players on one team. I don't know if they do that U17 level, but I was shocked last week when I looked at the medal standings at the U17 level. Like, Canada's they just haven't had much success there. And that's undoubtedly really helped the US. And I just put that little sort of funny side note in the chat that the US National Development Team is just like the old Soviet Red Army team, all the best players on one team. So I guess the US are really more socialist than they really think they are.
Don't walk down the streets in Washington and say that today.
Yeah, I know. I'm safe in my.
There's one thing, because I've been in discussion today. So USA, they have the most success in the U18 World Championship. They come with a centralized team playing teams that is picked together, and the Canadians never go. Canadians' best is in the Linka because the major junior season haven't started, so they would never have their best team in the U18. And Sweden and Finland, they have their best possible team, but then USA win because they are a much better team. They play together. On the other hand, Sweden has the most, compared to how many players, NHL players playing. They have over 100 players playing in NHL. So when you don't centralize the top of the top, maybe you breed more players that would be successful as seniors. Because USA could win all their medals at U18 or the U20. How many medals have they taken on the senior level the last 10 years? I think they have one, a bronze.
That get back to where we started, Malcolm, with Mr. Baker's talent identification thing, where if you got if you keep your players playing, it's those maybe players, not the elite players, that get all the attention. It's the ones below that if you sort of ignore them and don't develop them, kind of like Peter's saying, they do a better job in Sweden of developing a broader base of their talent base instead of just really focusing on the top group. So it's kind of comes back to where we started this discussion. But
yeah, I think you're right, and it's kind of odd. Like in Canada, we beat to death now this idea of the long-term athlete development model. We talk about sport for life and long-term development, and even into high performance levels. And then when we go to pick our representative teams, we fall back on the old system and we create all-star squads and we throw the development model out the window. So it's odd, and I wonder if way back in the day when the Red Army team and when you guys were involved with the national team and they were touring around Canada, that was actually more of a long-term development process, a talent development model, if you will, rather than a pure performance model. And maybe we have to look at that as sport leaders and decide whether we're all in or if we're sort of half in and want to continue down the roll the dice type of idea. Ultimately, I think we want to produce the best athletes in the world and continue to lead the world in the sport rather than just roll the dice.
And to fill in Peter's blank, I just checking, the U.S. has won 5 bronze medals in the last 25 years. Before then, you have to go back probably another 20 years before that to really find a medal. And so to his point, Sweden and Finland in particular have perhaps a broader talent base. Now the U.S. obviously is coming on, and what that's going to look like in the next 20 years might be a little different, but we'll see.
I think I don't want to lose perspective here. We're dealing with 5% maybe 3% of the hockey population, talking national team and Olympic teams, and keep in mind that what are they going to do when they're this is what we're doing now. This is the elite of the elite conversation, which deserves a stage, and it makes money, and it's the business of hockey, and it's so exciting. But to me, it's all about development. I like the 3 teams. Yeah, it could cost you from not winning the gold medal at U17 and not being as good. But we're developing more better players, and the bottom line is just develop more better players and better people, and we are. I think there was something that happened at the end of the game. It was on Facebook. The USA took a team picture, and Terry Lettingham, who's in Hockey Canada, retired board member, posted it and made a comment. Something occurred in that picture that I responded to, because in my mind, they may have won the gold medal, but they really didn't do something that was very respectful at that point. Does anybody know what they did at the end of the game when they took their team picture?
I had to turn it off. I couldn't watch it.
Okay, well, in Facebook, you might not have noticed it. They had a deserved celebration, but on the ice, they brought out 2 barrels, rubber garbage bins with Hockey Canada logos on them, and put them beside the team during the team picture. And the coach talked about that, and they tried to justify it. And as a coach, in my mind, I'm saying, no, get that the hell out of here. If that's what you do when you win a gold medal, I don't give a shit about gold medals. And I put in the quote at that point on Facebook how disappointed I was that they did that. And I said, you got to remember, a gold medal's a wonderful thing, but if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it. And that was an indication of the lack of appreciation of the respect that sports should teach. And if you don't do that, you're going to have what's happened politically in the States today. And I think it starts with that. It starts with that kind of an attitude. The coach not being aware of, hey, this is bigger than the game.
What was the rationale for that, Wally? Like, why did they? What message were they trying to send? What was the rationale, justification?
Their justification was it was a reminder for them. That's who they had to go through to win the gold medal. And that we were the most formidable appointment. That was sort of the rationale. I just think, and I equated it back to the debate back in 2002. I don't know that there was a flag on the USA women's floor that they walked across.
There was not.
Yeah, I'm sure there wasn't. But it was something that was used as a motivational technique leading into it and followed up with after the game by Wickenheiser. And she was asked about it in interviewed. Well, those kind of things don't need to be part of the public domain. What happens in the room stays in the room. And that in the picture, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm the coach. Those bins aren't going to be there. Period. And that's just a matter of how you coach, why you coach, what's your mission, what's your purpose. And the big purpose, the main purpose isn't to win the gold medal. Do the right things winning the gold medal. And they won the gold medal. Kudos to them. But boy, if they don't get the lesson out of this, it doesn't really bother me if they're going to have an attitude like that. So,
in a backwards way, it kind of makes me feel better. They did it for 2 reasons. Number one, maybe they're actually not as confident as I thought they all were. And number 2, whoa, you don't think that picture is going to be on the Team Canada bulletin board next year at the World Junior Championship? Like, never do anything, to your point, Wally, to sort of fuel the fire of your opponents. If I'm coaching the World Junior next year, that's going up on the summer camp. Here's our goal, like payback. Oh, got to try to read this, Brad.
Kim, take care. Thanks for coming on, Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Always good to have you.
Peter, what's happening in Sweden? What kind of reaction is there to the Swedish performance in this tournament? You've been on for a bit of the Canadian reaction, but I'm curious to know what your take there is generally in Sweden, and then specifically your point of view.
Oh, you're still there, Pete?
I think his speaker's off.
Oh.
I saw his name come up, but I don't know if he's there.
Looks like he might have had to jump off. He's not listed as being on right now.
Oh.
Anyway, yeah, that would be a good question to see what the Swedish hockey experts, quote unquote, are saying.
Rick, what's up?
Another misraise.
Okay.
Just hit the key at the wrong time.
Ella, you're living in Massachusetts now. Did you cheer for Canada and your kids cheer for the U.S. or?
Well, we had this conversation before the game, and he picked his side, so he was pretty excited about that. But I mean, you got to do what you got to do. But it always shocks me, when this tournament comes around, how big it's not down here.
Mhm.
Like it's really not that. Nobody's got an eye on it, really. I mean, some of the guys, people in the know kind of thing are paying attention, but in general, like the population, like the kids on my team and stuff, they got no idea that this is going on. So, but I mean, the U.S. won the gold medal, and that's a nice thing for my son to be able to watch. He was cheering for them, and he got pretty excited. The thing that really struck me, like when they were, and I did watch, I let him watch the gold medal. I didn't want to watch it, but I let him watch it all the way through. But the U.S., like their really impactful players are really small, and they were able to get to the net even when Canada was controlling the play. When the U.S. got it back into the Canadian zone, they made something dangerous happen. Pretty well on the regular. They were able to drive it to the middle, and it was those little guys like Alex Turcotte and Caulfield and Zegras. Like they're not very big. They sure didn't look it in line. Maybe they were standing next to the big guys. I didn't look at haven't looked at the roster, but it just seemed to me like we played a lot from the outside in their zone. And when they took it back down to us, they got it to the middle, they got it to the net, and those little guys did the dirty work. And they weren't scared, and maybe that's part of the underdog mentality with some of those players. I don't know, but I thought they were really impressive in getting to the net.
I think physiologically, I think they train, they do all the right things to be able to maximize their power on ice to play the game the way they do, and they can get inside you, and they did. They were really quick in decision making, quick in movement, and played very gritty. And that means that's not just mental; it's more than physical. It takes training, coaching, education, and they've done a lot of the right things, which centralization basically can do.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a good thing going for them there, for sure.
Well, I was outside not playing with Preston yesterday because it's illegal, but he's working for Anaheim, and they're really excited about Zegras. He was saying because they've always done so well, they haven't had a top draft pick in so long, and he's pretty amazed at his skill. So
he did really well.
One of the D are theirs too. It could be one of the Finns or this. It might be that Broberg for Sweden. They've got a pretty good looking D. I can't remember who it was as well. I'll have to try to Google that.
Yeah, because their team has been getting old, and they got to reset for sure. But he was saying he's going to be allowed to go to the games in Calgary and Edmonton. He thought it was just going to be able to be in Calgary. He's a pro scout now, and so he was pretty happy about that.
Yeah. Tom, if you're talking to him, I'm curious about scouting in general in the draft, the junior draft in particular, and the number of lower picks for Sweden and Finland that really rose to the occasion in this tournament. And it made me, during the tournament, we supposedly had 18 or so many first round picks, and yet you have these lower picks and kids to be drafted next year. And they anticipate next year. I didn't see many major junior kids in the predicted list for next year. So I'm curious about European scouting. Number one, development. I have no doubts about their ability to develop players physiologically, physically, and mentally now, especially in terms of skill and hockey sense. But to draft, moving forward, I'm wondering most important scout in an organization's got to be a European scouts.
Yeah, well, I think it always had. This year it was so heavy on Canada. I think last year it was really heavy on US, wasn't it? And so it's kind of switches around quite a bit.
And they were sixth last year.
On the telecast, they had said that both LA and Anaheim had the most represented players in the gold medal game, that there were 10 that those teams, Anaheim and LA, had control of. But I was wondering, Tom, did Rich say anything about how they're going to manage minor league players? Like for the Canadian teams, will those minor league players to come up, will they have to go through a 14-day quarantine before being able to play? Or
I don't know, but I would assume they would. I'd assume they're probably going to all have to stay in a hotel together and practice together, same with Dominic, because he's got to come up here because they can't go back and forth on the border.
are they moving their team up here then?
Yeah, all the teams are.
Oh, okay. So all the minor league teams are coming up here too.
All those travel restrictions, you can't run a league in both countries.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that whether they were all the Canadian minor league teams or Canadian teams minor league affiliates. Well, I guess it would only affect really Edmonton, Calgary. Well, I know that Toronto and Winnipeg's are both in their own city already.
Yeah. I wonder if Dominic's in Calgary right now. Because they start campus on.
I don't think so. I'm doing maybe he is. I'm doing a Zoom call tomorrow with him and doing 4 of the minor hockey coaches in San Jose that he's working with on the mission statement exercise. I think he's still there, and he's really going after Laura to try to hire her to come down and run the program at St. Mary's. And basically, goal is to create 3 female teams, 3 different teams at each grade level at that school. And it's a school of it's like a university campus, but it's a high school, sports school. And they've sure got the budget and the resources to do great things. And he seems to be helping them out in a pretty good way. I'm curious about how he can do multitask like he is right now.
He should be looking at Kaylee Curran, who was with me for a long time too.
Well, let him know, because
she's a teacher, right?
Yeah. And, he's going to need people, good people. And I know I recommended Laura to him, and they have been communicating. I talked to Laura at length, and she's keen on it. And boy, you create quite a team down there. The big thing is his understanding of the game and his perspective and his purposeful coaching understanding of that to work in a high school program. And, he's coaching in the American League and the NHL, and what's going on in those organizations is not much different than many minor hockey associations relative to responsibility, ethics, and professionality. It's just not as good as what you can imagine. So he's fortunately found his foot in a good door in California.
It was an interesting conversation this morning. I'm going to be going here pretty quick, but a couple of observations that I wanted to pass along. One is that it doesn't matter whether you're actively coaching or not right now, whomever was on this call, it's kind of interesting to think how much emotion was coming out when people were talking about a game that they're not even invested in other than the country that they live in for the most part. It's one of those funny things about that. My sister used to say to me when we lost games when I was a player that she would say, "When did the game end?" And because the next day I would just be horrible to be around. So it's kind of funny that way, the amount of emotion that's in it. I think that short-term competition piece is we forget about that. Although this wasn't really short term, they were together for over 50 days. But that piece is really important and to remember. And it was kind of funny that a couple of those kids, I was there when they had their very first short-term competition in Sanderson and Holloway. Sanderson was on our team at the PB Prospects Cup that I was mentoring, and they didn't do so well there. So I'm thinking he's probably happier with his result at this short-term competition than when he was 10 and 11 years old. So, but and I know, Laura, you've got lots of experience with short-term competition and with several challenges and Alberta Winter Games and reigning gold medalist from the Alberta Winter Games as head coach. So it's interesting, those pieces to do with breaking down the game, breaking down the tournament as short-term competition, and then looking at it. And I think that it'd be interesting to see if you could ask those players and ask the coaching staff after the fact, what did you learn from the experience? What was your key takeaway? What do you need to get better at with that growth mindset? So,
Laura, are you still on?
Yep, I'm still here, just listening.
I'm curious about when I watched you at the Alberta Winter Games win the gold medal and going through that tournament. It's not 54 days like this one, not the same degree of hype, but the program of excellence is designed to prepare for those young players for the one or two that might come out of the province to make the team. What was your take watching the World Juniors relative to having coached in short term? How do you compare those two? Do you have any takeaways from the men?
Yeah, you know what? It was interesting listening to kind of the conversation about the adversity piece we talked about a little while ago. But the thing that I kind of took away from that is not so much hoping for that loss. I think it's more so the adversity piece and what you do with that, whether that be you face a team where you still win the game, but the game wasn't great, and so you're having to make kind of adjustments as you go, versus even having to have a loss, because we've all coached in games which we've won but we probably shouldn't have. And I think just even being able to have one of those off games or off periods or kind of moments where you do have to take the team in and go, okay, what did we learn from that period? Or how, what can we do better, or how can we improve, or what did we see, and have the players be able to give that feedback back to the coaches and to the rest of the group. I find that to be the biggest thing, and that was a huge key in Winter Games for me last year. We lost one game in the round robin, but it was a very bad game. We should not have lost that game, and the girls were very down on themselves. And it was actually became a very interesting bonding moment where we had a little kind of kumbaya of the girls facing that adversity head on and using it to inspire each other to rise above that adversity and face that adversity. And then we ended up going on and winning, but it wasn't like with the team that I had, we should have flown through that tournament. So I think that watching that World Junior team, it would have been, I kind of agree with not wanting to coach to lose, or kind of wanting that loss on your plate, but almost just even having a period, or even a little like blip in their play where you can kind of have those moments of camaraderie, and we don't know if they had that. They seem like a pretty close team, but I think there comes a time when you do face that challenge and it's very public, right? So that's kind of was my takeaway when I was watching those teams. Um, it seemed that everybody kind of wanted to do each other's jobs at some point, and it was a very close game. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about being able to face that adversity and turn inwards as a group and use that to build.
Laura, you said one thing, and this is what I'm curious about. I wonder, and I don't know, but when you coached that team in the Alberta games, you said you asked the players, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
So you actually listened to your players and you drew out of them their thoughts and feelings to become a part of the energy to go forward.
Oh, absolutely.
And my question is, does this happen at the World Juniors? Are they asking players, or are the players waiting for the answers from the coaches? And that's a completely different level of coaching we're moving towards.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very, very important. I think I know that with Barry's work with the Program of Excellence and the U17 teams, that Socrates method of coaching and questioning and engaging players is going to get better results. And I'm curious to know is where are we at relative to that? Where are the Finns at? And how many other countries are doing that? Because it's sort of a shared responsibility. The team is everyone, not just the coaches. So that's the one thing I wonder about at this level, is that the coaches competing with themselves, amongst themselves, to deliver the message that needs to be delivered, or are they involving the players in that process? So, and I have no idea where they're at. But I believe that's what I mean about moving forward in 21st century coaching. That's the way to go, and I'm glad to see that you've had that experience. So,
well, and I'm wondering, Wally, if you don't mind, just because I don't coach boys and I never have, but I'm wondering if that even happens or starting to happen at all in the minor level, because I coach the female midget AAA team now, and I find it way harder to engage with those girls. So many of them are so concrete in the way they've been coached that even that questioning and getting them to really think for themselves is very difficult. It's we found it to be quite hard to get them to open up and think for themselves, right? Like it's not coach telling you go here, do this, do this. It's that, Wally, like you mentioned, that questioning, right? What did you see? What, how could this have worked better? Or how, what worked, what didn't? And is that something, do you guys know that's happening on the guys' side at all?
I don't know. Like, I'm just thinking our entire Skype session, it would be great to have 5 of the players on, but we would have to keep it private, I'm sure, to talk about what kind of communication actually went on, but just asking them their thoughts and what they would have done or thought about. Or did they even think about it? Did they just want to do what they were told? Did they just fit into the roles that they were morphed into over the course of the tournament? That's what intrigues me about this. As I think there's so much potential to go beyond what the game is moving forward with what you're experiencing. And I believe, in my experience in minor hockey, that is non-existent now. The potential to do that is unbelievable. It's infinite, but it may be lost in the shuffle. the political shuffle of the way things are always done, because that's the way we do things, and that's what worries me. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Rick, I'm going to ask you, Rick, did the inquiry or Socrates method enter your mindset when you were coaching midget AAA and playing in the max? Or is that something that's new?
I would have to say it's more new than not, Wally. My own particular style was to involve a lot of discussion, more so than what I had experienced prior to myself being a coach. But it's something that I've adopted more recently, and if given the opportunity again, would use more liberally than I have in the past.
I guess I was going to say, sort of to Laura's point, which is a good one about when things are going really well as it did for Canada, it's really incumbent on the staff to maintain perspective and stay level-headed and honestly evaluate the team's performance. And I think it's very likely that after the Slovakia game, for instance, which was a lot tighter than anybody would like it, and maybe tighter than people thought it would be, that they probably had that sort of discussion, like as Laura's suggesting, that, hey, we won the game, but what do we have to do better, or here's what we need to do better. And then they go out the next game and blow Switzerland out 10-0. But so then again to Rick's point, you start building that momentum where you're just like rolling. And so I was a little nervous going into the Finland game, thinking, oh man, has it been too easy to this point? And then they're totally dominant against Finland for the first two periods, like almost as good as I've ever seen a team play in terms of puck decisions and territorial advantage and goal score, everything. So they just had it hitting on all, and then they go out and do it again against in their next two games. But it's a really important point that it's definitely up to the coaching staff to maintain perspective, stay grounded, and make sure the players are honestly evaluating both the team game overall and their individual games. So it's a really, really good point. And again, I don't think you hope you lose, but obviously everybody knows that a loss in this short-term event doesn't mean it's over. It's a chance to refocus and see experience some real adversity. But so all good points.
Tim, you brought up the Finland game as far as where they are moving forward. When I watched that game and I watched Dylan Cousins make two really strong efforts to make sure he got that empty net goal in a game that he didn't need it, that to me was a signal that they are getting to that point where it's play until it's done. Don't worry about anything else. And I didn't as yet have an opportunity to see either the semi or the final games because I was working. But to Wally's point, when watching them come into the rink and seeing, if I'd have seen the Canadians happy-go-lucky and smiling, I'd have had the same reaction he did, that they're not ready today. And I'm sure that the coaches talked to that, addressed it, talked to it. But the players don't buy into it. If they get it in their head that they've got it all figured out now, again, that's to Laura's question. They're not willing to listen. They need to have a wake-up call that's going to be an in-life experience for them to understand what lesson you're trying to deliver there. And sometimes in the short term, that's tough to do.
I think it's a good observation, Wally, that you made, the difference of the two teams coming into the building, which I think somebody, maybe Malcolm or Al, pointed out. It's part of the home team mentality versus the visitor underdog mentality. But the other point is that's really interesting is, there's a continuum there of game face versus being relaxed and prepared. And, I guess on the one hand, it's easy to say they were too relaxed, too happy-go-lucky. But And again, Laura's coached females, I've coached females, so many of us have. In the female game, you want some of that relaxed, happy element in your game preparation. Because if it's not there, if there's too much game face mentality, I think it hurts. I mean, not all female athletes or players, but and so many, and I've said many times before, I think the guys can learn something from the females instead of having game face on all the time. They could move a little bit towards being more relaxed and enjoying themselves in the moment, and the girls maybe move a little bit or to the middle of the spectrum and have a bit more of a game face. So there's that whole dynamic that sort of enters in there. But I definitely think it translated to the game. Like the U.S. were just more focused and determined, absolutely, in the first period, even though Canada didn't dominate the first 10 minutes, but they controlled the first 10 minutes. I still think the U.S. looked a lot more sort of focused and determined. So just interesting psychological elements.
See, the common thought is if your teams win like they did against Russia, how are you supposed to react as a coach in the dressing room after that game to prepare for the next one?
So how would you react?
Well, I think the common way is to get off your high horse. You had a hell of a game, but to prepare for the next one, I never thought of it now, but the way they looked going into the arena, you're reading body language after games. You're reading body language going back to the hotel and reading body language coming back to the rink. But you set the stage. You begin coaching for the next game immediately after that game's over. And there's no time to celebrate. And it's easy in retrospect to say that and do that. But, the common thing is you bring them down to earth because that's one game. It was a hell of a game. I'm glad we had it. But there is no celebration here. So who knows? It's easy to talk about now because you're not there. You're not in the middle of it. I do know Mike Dick, the assistant coach, and I'm going to talk to him, and maybe I can get him to come on for a call to give us an inside story on his take and these kind of things. But I might do that one-on-one with him to see how comfortable he would be. But I know Mike was the one coach when I watched the bench, he never reacted. He had that even keel persona about him, and he was walking not the length of the bench, but to the head coach and communicating with him and going back. But after a goal was scored against him, I watched how he reacted, and I watched the head coach roll his eyes and throw his head back. And that's what I'm reading. I'm watching coaches coach. And how the players play isn't as important to me. So I'm just studying the game from that point of view. And it's all good stuff. Like this whole thing is really good stuff.
So here's a question, and sort of to your point, Wally. And it'd be interesting to hear from Mike, but I'd be really surprised if after the Russia game, the talk in the room wasn't very much like an NHL playoff game where they've won game 1 or game 2 or game 3 of a series where, okay, good job, great job. That game's behind us. Let's get ready for the next challenge. I'd be very surprised if that wasn't the talk and the mentality. But here's the question. Every game, the Canadian players were going into the rink, waving at the fans, smiling, everything else. So do you, as a coach, do you tell them not to do that before the championship game? And what message does that send if you tell them not to do it?
Well, that's your call if you're the head coach.
I'm asking you, like, would you change it? And what do you think message that sends if you ask them to say, hey guys, don't wave at the people, don't wave at the cameras?
Oh, I can't answer that. I have to be there to answer it. And, I can't talk about it theoretically. I'm talking about it, um, you know, just talking about it after the fact. And it's easy to do that. Hindsight's 2020. But
Well,
that's the whole idea of it. I'm not going to coach those scenarios moving forward. But I am saying what we're talking about is if one of those coaches, if Mike, after talking to me or to us, gets to coach moving forward, he's going to be a much better coach because he's been a part of a debrief, an engaged conversation and debate in a real life situation that he's been through. And he's likely going to head coach that team down the road.
and don't get me wrong, I think it's a very interesting observation, but it is true that they did it every single game, and so it's a valid coaching question. Is kind of not unlike Kim's point. Like, do you when everything's going great, and if you've got your team where you think they're grounded,
Yeah.
do you change something just to go into a championship game? It's like,
Yeah.
that's overcoaching, and that might be overcoaching. That might be micromanaging, but it still does point to the mentality going into the rink. But they've been successful doing that to that point. So it's, that's why, you just have to.
I'd sure like to know how they walked into the rink before they played Russia.
It was the same.
Yeah.
It was the same every game.
I didn't see them walk into the rink before Russia, but
No, neither did I.
but that's the point. Did their body language change?
It was the same, Wally. Like I watched all the games. They showed a little clip in the pregame show of every game of them walking into the rink.
I wouldn't do anything. I'm just saying hypothetically, I wouldn't do anything. The way we've done things worked. It worked for that game. It's going to work for the next game. But here it's a factor, and to me, it's a mute factor because they walked in with them and they saw them, and I'm sure you're constantly alert with your antenna to those kind of things. And I don't know about you, Tim, but when you were at Sochi before games, in terms of the girls' faces and their mindset and their readiness,
Torino.
You could tell they were in the zone. They were ready to play.
We were pretty much always that way, honestly. Yeah. That was such a freaking great group. I honestly don't remember. I do often have, and I'm not always correct, I do always have my radar up in terms of, as we all do, in terms of, are we too loose? Are we too tight? Like, where are we at? The one story in that mode that I've told before is I knew we were in trouble. And to preface it, like the old football coach at Oklahoma won many national championships.
Woody?
I can't think of his name, but anyway, one of his things was, you want your players laughing and loose before a big game. And so I sort of took that lesson, and I told this what I thought was a pretty funny story, and sort of to your point about the Ottawa coach, told a pretty funny story before the warm-up of our first game at the national championship with UFC. Tom, you might remember if you were there. And I told this funny story right before we went out for warm-up. Dead silence in the room, not a laugh. And I'm like, I walked out of the room and I'm like, oh Christ, we are tighter than tight can be. And that's the way we were for the whole first period. We fumbled and bumbled around. And so you got to read your team, obviously. And it would be interesting, again, from Mike, did they have any sense that they were either nervous or overconfident? I don't think they were probably a group that would be overconfident. I think they might have been a bit nervous or tentative, but be interesting to know.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's really good.
I've got I got another Zoom call at noon here, so I want to jump off and grab a bit of something to eat before that. But again, really enjoyed this, everybody. Laura, great to have you on.
Yeah,
You know,
thanks.
always enjoy having you and Kim and Carla on when she gets on, or anybody else. It's awesome. So
Yeah.
look forward to next week and have something else around.
I'm likewise. I've got things to do here at home. The wife is going through a bunch of tests this week, so I'm on duty here at home trying to figure out what I can do to help out. And I want to thank you all for getting on. Thanks, Laura. And have you talked to Dominic since we've talked?
No, I sent him an email a few days ago, but I haven't heard back from him yet.
Do you know where he is? If he's in Calgary or if he's in?
I have no idea. I thought he was in California still, but
Yeah,
he may have moved around since then.
yeah. I'm going to text him just to see where he might be. So, okay, everybody, I've got to run. So, thank you very much for your time and really good to get on again.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Hey, see you, everybody.